So our next panel is going to look at changing models of service delivery. So we're going to look at some specific examples of cool new things that are taking place, but also think more generally about ways to facilitate those types of changes in the future. So we have three leading thinkers in this area. Zia Youssef is the CEO of Streetline Incorporated, a leading global provider of sensor-enabled smart city solutions. He is a seasoned senior technology executive with a track record of leading companies to success. Prior to his role leading Streetline, he was entrepreneur in residence at Sutter Hill Ventures and also Norwest Venture Partners. He spent the last 10 years at SAP AG, where he was executive vice president and a member of SAP's executive leadership team. Kinfield Griffin is the CEO of Mobile Surveys Incorporated. M-Survey represents mobile surveys that operate in Africa, the Caribbean, as well as the United States. He has a background in computer science, architecture, and engineering. He was educated at MIT, and he has assisted with the engineering and design of M-Survey's technology. He discovered that in many emerging markets, they are somewhat constrained by the lack of access to information, and so this approach is something that enables the use of better information in the decision-making process. Stephen Livingston is professor of Media and Public Affairs and International Affairs with appointments in the School of Media and Public Affairs and the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. His research focuses on media and information technology as well as global politics. He's particularly interested in the role of information technology in governance and economic development. He is the co-editor with Gregor Walter Drop of a new Oxford University Press book entitled Bits and Atoms, Information and Communications Technology in Areas of Limited Statehood. And it looks at how mobile telephony and digital platforms enable community groups and NGOs to provide public goods in the developing world. So I'm going to start with Zia. So Streetline uses sensors to enable various types of smart city solutions. I know one of your goals is to improve parking. Welcome to Washington, D.C. We could use that solution here. How can mobile help people with parking problems?
So has anybody ever had trouble finding a parking spot? Yeah? So you're all potential customers. First of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I just flew in on the red eye from San Francisco and thought because of the snow I'd never get here, and this seems to be this window of opportunity, so glad to be here. So Streetline is believe it or not, in the business of parking. It's an industry that hasn't really changed in the last 30, 40 years. You still have coin-operated meters. In DC now you have kind of mobile payments and so on, but you search for a parking spot and all of these things. And we looked at this problem from a number of different angles. One, from the perspective of a city. Parking is a massive real estate asset in a city environment. It's not priced appropriately. It's not allocated appropriately. So we go out and put out these sensors on the ground. The sensors detect the presence of a car. All that data and information then goes to city officials for them to do things like dynamic pricing, to be able to manage those spaces and think about it in a much more strategic way. And in the previous panel, they talked about the Internet of Things and sensors. So that's one piece of it. In addition, that information, very importantly, also goes to consumers. So we're able to tell you exactly where the open parking spots are on your smartphone, eventually, actually pretty quickly in-car navigation as well. And so what would a mobile panel be without a demo here? So this is, I'm just going to show you Boston. We just announced Boston yesterday. So in this part of Boston, at this very second, there's 51 parking spaces. This is around the convention center. And this is all on street. And if you click that open, it shows you where the number of spaces are. So this is happening this very second in Boston. I can show you Birmingham. I can show you parts of New York, Fort Lauderdale, and so on. And so it shows you, if, what we're trying to impact is that decision point when you get to an intersection. Right? You get to that intersection, you take a left, you take a right, you go straight. You're arguing with your spouse, where do you want to go? So we help marriages as well. So it's a and so what we'll be able to tell you is, look, don't take a right. There's less than 2 spots there. You may find something, but highly unlikely. Take a left. where there's either 2+ or 4+, you're guaranteed to find parking. Up to 30% of the traffic in a city is caused by people looking for parking, believe it or not. It's a massive drain on the resources of a country. Historically, everybody's focusing on traffic. It takes you 14.2 minutes to get from point A to point B. And there'll be a lot of PhDs working on this, and they'll get it down to a precise 13.9 seconds. The problem is point B is not your destination. If your destination was the Brookings Institute and you kind of drove by here, you're like, hey, I'm here. It's at 14.2 minutes. Your real destination is point C when you've parked the car. And it's that second piece of the puzzle that nobody focused in on. So at the end of the day, this is all about, you can talk about new data, you can talk about big data. It's about generating new types of information that wasn't possible before. In this instance, through the case of sensors, and we'll add other sensing devices as we go along. And this kind of silly example of parking, which tried, when I started doing this, going and having a cocktail conversation saying, I'm the parking industry, that was a great conversation. It's like, do you park cars? Do you valet? But it's very sophisticated technology, and it's changing how kind of cities will be run, because everybody's realized it has such a massive impact on the economy. It's usually the second or third largest source of revenue for a city, which most people don't realize. So that's what we do. And you couldn't do it without the mobile piece of it, right? Whether it's the smartphone, whether it's the in-car piece of it, whether it's a Google map, whether you make a restaurant reservation with open table, and then you can eventually go reserve a spot in garages as well. So it's kind of connecting those pieces, and it's the mobile technology piece of it that actually gets all that information out.
Interesting. I know in DC, before they moved to this mobile payment system, which has been great, you literally used to have to carry around bags of quarters because you point out it's a major source of revenue. So of course they were raising the rates, but yet they still were using parking meters. And so that just kind of illustrates the nature of the problem. So Kenfield, you work on a different aspect. You've noted that in emerging markets in the developing world, that countries often lack mechanisms to provide feedback and help decision makers take advantage of available information. So you've developed what you call the Survey Monkey for emerging markets. How are you using information to improve decision making?
Well, thanks for having me again. I mean, this happened to me when I was doing my PhD at MIT, when I was actually walking around, these low-income areas in Kenya. And, even though I look Kenyan, I'm not Kenyan, I'm from the Caribbean. So knocking on someone's door just to ask them a question or 3 questions, taking up their time was very difficult. And, we take it for granted that data is something that's, ubiquitous everywhere, but it's not, especially in Kenya and in the Caribbean where I'm from. And I'll give you 3 examples. For instance, in Trinidad and Tobago, they have the Telecommunication Authority of Trinidad and Tobago has $20 million to invest in infrastructure in the Caribbean when it comes to mobile. But they don't know, with 140% mobile penetration, who has access to what are they using this access for, and who has internet on their mobile phones. So that's why we found it very interesting for us to use that portal to get data, to see where the points are, where limited access to actually invest the $20 million. And I'll give you another example with the HIV/AIDS in some high-risk communities in Kenya. Dr. Habera, who sits in MGH, she travels back and forth to Kenya a lot, and the problem with that is, carbon emissions. Also, it's just a fact of time. She wants to assess high-risk communities and understand exactly what their patterns are over a period of time. So what we did, they use our technology to assess HIV/AIDS patients. So every patient that comes into the hospital, they register on our platform, and every day they get a survey that they time. So if I want to get a survey, I say 2,100 hours, and I get that survey every day. It changes the pattern of behavior. So now people are reporting what happens during their time. So Harvard just recently did a study saying that the best time for you to get valid data is at the front line. So don't wait till 2 weeks later to ask someone, how did I serve you? Ask them right then when you serve them. So it's best for them to remember when the last time they engaged in sexual activities. And then the third one, is agriculture. In Kenya specifically, most of our work is in East Africa. We're scaling to West Africa and now in the Caribbean. But there are farmers throughout Kenya that they are milk farmers. They produce about a market value of $3,500 of milk a year. Brookside Farms, who actually buys that, they have no database of these farmers. They have no connection. So these farmers want to improve their yield. And Brookside wants to actually implement facilities to improve that yield, but they don't know the distribution of these farmers throughout Kenya. So we registered 14,000 farmers for them in 3 days on our technology. Now they interact with these farmers over time, and if you can do the math, 3,500 times 14,000, that's a lot of revenue for Brookside Farms. And if they can improve that yield, you're improving the profits of that farmer as well as the profits of Brookside. So this is how information is used to make decisions that change people's lives in emerging markets. And it's not, I've heard a lot of conversation about big data. I'm talking about little pieces of data. How many cattle do you have? That's enough to inform what's the potential yield of milk, right? So this is the types of things we do.
Thank you. So Stephen, your new book looks at how mobile empowers community groups and NGOs to provide public goods in the developing world. And I know you've done lots of work in Africa, in India, as well as other places. What does innovation look like in the developing world as opposed to the developed world?
Well, first of all, Daryl, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to come and share these ideas with you. It's good to be back at Brookings. I've had the good fortune over the last 10 years or so to travel to about 40 countries looking at the impact, disruptive impact, sometimes positive, sometimes not, of technologies in Africa, India, as you said, Iraq, Afghanistan. And one of the things that I'm struck by is it's simply the change in the sense of social relationships, political relationships in communities that before were fairly isolated. I think one of the things that we have to do in order to begin to get our heads around, our arms around the enormity, the impact of something as simple as the mobile phone is to keep in mind that in 2000, approximately 2% of Africans had access to telephones, and most of those, of course, were landline. The last figure that I've seen most recently paid attention to is 63% of Africans in 2012 now have access to mobile telephony. One of my favorite photos, in fact, it's on the cover of the book that Daryl mentioned, is of a Maasai standing in the middle of the savannah holding very proudly two things, his punga, his machete on the hip, but also right next to it is a mobile phone. And what that empowers is just unimaginable, and so it's important for us to just spend some time thinking about that. There are some technologies and applications that are unfamiliar to most of us in the North, so in the global North. So when we talk about mobile phones, we also have to think about the fact that mobile telephony is just one element in an integrated constellation of systems. This example here uses something called GIS and GPS as well, probably as mobile telephony. It's the integration of these systems that's so important for us to understand how they truly impact a farmer living in a rural area in Kenya. So some of the technologies that piggyback onto or enable cellular telephony to be powerful, we may not have heard of, but they're important. Frontline SMS and rapid SMS are texting aggregation platforms that allow for the mass either management of text messages coming in from phone users or the distribution of text messaging going out to users. And this is used all over the place. I'll come to an example that fits very well. We need to keep in mind also, too, that remote sensing satellite imagery and remote sensing data are a crucial part of this equation. The first high-resolution commercial, not government, but commercial remote sensing satellite called Ikonos went aloft in 1999, became operational in 2000, and it's been joined by a constellation of other remote sensing satellites. This is another part of a constellation of technologies that come together to make the mobile telephony so important. And then when we start to think about some of the key applications, we can tick down many of the examples. Certainly M-Survey is going to be one of them. but in the Global South there are others, the Grameen Foundations, community knowledge workers, simply empowers farmers who hold cell phones in very remote areas to serve as liaisons in terms of best practices for raising a crop. Another example beyond the community knowledge workers is something called trade at hand. I mean, the description fits the purpose. It gives farmers information on the daily commodity price quotes. Imagine that you are a farmer raising coffee somewhere in rural Rwanda. Somebody shows up, asks you to buy your coffee. If you aren't empowered with information as to what the daily price fluctuations are on that key commodity that needs to feed your family for the entire year, you're likely to be taken advantage of. But if you have that information in your hand, you are empowered to communicate on a more level playing field with that intermediary, with that buyer. Another technology that is possible because of mobile telephony in Africa and elsewhere, any conversation shouldn't miss this, but the revolutionary effect of something called M-Pesa. M-Pesa is responsible, according to a recent study, of 1/3 of Kenya's gross domestic product last year. What is it? M-Pesa is simply, Pesa means money in Swahili. It means mobile money transfer. When you travel around Kenya, as I know that my colleagues know, you will find M-Pesa signs and stands where if you don't have currency, you can use your phone to pay for a service, a commodity, healthcare, education, or simply food stock. If you are a merchant with a small little hut somewhere in a rural village, rather than getting on the matatu, the bus, going to Nairobi, buying stock, bringing it back, you get on your phone, you buy the stock, use M-Pesa, it's delivered on the next matatu that arrives, you get your stock, you sell it, and the exchange itself is based on M-Pesa. So these are the ways in which mobile telephony are empowering communities, and this is just the start. There are hundreds and hundreds of examples of this sort of thing that we could list. So, this is some of the things that I've been trying to pay attention to in my books and in my writing and travel and thinking and teaching. So,
I like the image of the machete on the one hand and the mobile device on the other.
They're both cutting-edge technologies.
Yes.
Thank you, Daryl.
Hey, just consider me I am your stand-up person. So Zia, you mentioned that the sensors represent a big growth area. We're seeing kind of a rise of machine-to-machine
Right.
communication, and so you're focusing on parking. So I'm curious, when you developed this application, what barriers did you experience, and how did you overcome them?
Well, on the technology side, there's certainly our sensors last 4.5 to 5 years on 2 AA batteries, for example, lithium batteries. The sensing technology is getting better and better, and we're doing some work with Qualcomm on looking at some of that sensing capability. So there's just the physics of sensors and the economics of sensors you have to kind of get over, get them out there. But I think our biggest challenge, honestly, is not the technology piece. It's the exciting process of selling to municipalities and cities. Which can be quite exciting and sometimes
Is this exciting in a good way or a bad way?
in a very respectful way. So it's the business model. It's incredible, and I spend a lot of time now with mayors and city officials and so on and so forth. But it's incredible how much new technology is available to rethink cities. This whole topic of smart cities across the board, and whether it's in community participation or getting information to that old man or old lady who doesn't have to stand out in the snow and they know when their bus is coming, there's a whole range of examples. And I think city leaders, and I think mayors is, by the way, the most exciting kind of political role in the country today. If you're a mayor and you're forward-looking, you can change how people work and live, which will not happen from the federal government side. So it's that how does the purchasing and procurement process for cities and the federal government change in order to take advantage of these massively new technologies? So it's more on that go-to-market side, if you will, and less so on the technology side. The technology side is it's just unbelievable the kind of things that are possible now. And this whole topic of the Internet of Things, which is mentioned, is going to be, and you look at GE and you look at Cisco and Qualcomm and all these companies, The only way to make an inanimate object smart is to put software in it. I used to work at SAP, as you mentioned. I think Siemens has 30,000 software engineers. SAP probably has 15 or 18. Who's a software company, right? So you're having these, I think every company, in essence, has become a software company, whether you're selling shoes or vegetables or cars or trains or automobiles. And so this Internet of Things making sensors smart is going to have a much bigger impact on how all of us, again, work and live every day than even the Internet did. And by the way, just one comment. It seems like we didn't plan this, but we have East Africa and Kenya in common. I also, on my side, kind of teach at Stanford, in the Stanford Design School, a class called Liberation Technology, which is looking at the use of mobile technology in cooperation with the University of Nairobi for economic development.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the low-tech version of mobile, like M-Pesa, and you don't have smartphones, but the mobile coverage rate, even for feature phones, is very high.
Yeah.
And in places like Kibera, which is outside Nairobi, I think it's more than 80-90% of mobile information. And it's the democratization of information, which is unbelievable.
So, Kenfield, you were, we hear a lot about big data. You were mentioning the value of little data in the healthcare area, in agriculture, and elsewhere. Now, I know you're interested in using M-Survey to provide feedback so that we can get better decisions. We also know in a lot of countries around the world, people are not particularly interested in getting feedback. And so I'm just curious, when you have started to market this in the private sector, in the public sector, and elsewhere, how have people responded to it? And in cases where the public sector has adopted it, how has it affected the relationship between people and public officials?
That's an interesting question.
Thank you.
So, yes, to begin with, there was an issue with folks having a problem with, hearing the truth. And I think now on the public and private sector, both, there's a lot of competition coming into emerging markets. And how do you, avoid competition or beat your competition is knowing your customers and knowing your constituents. So I think that also pushes the envelope to getting feedback. And on the public side, because of economies right now is struggling from a financial perspective, and people are looking for that impact investment rather than just, I'm going to provide you donor funds to do X, Y, and Z. They're looking to see exactly, what's the end of that equation, what's coming out of the result. So I think just pushing that envelope or pushing that the agenda of private sector knowing that competition is there, you need to beat the competition, and public sector knowing that you're not going to get funding if you don't show the impact that you're having with my money, I think that actually helps us a lot. And now it's actually becoming more and more necessary for folks to actually have that data to prove, even just to write a grant. They do a baseline survey to show exactly this is the problem. Now I need X amount of dollars to invest in this problem, and this is going to be the result. And we'll do another survey again on M-Survey to show you the result. So now we're capturing them at the beginning and the end of the whole cycle. So, and obviously, we look at it as a design problem. Anything we look at as a product to a policy. How you design a policy without feedback loops. It's a very iterative process. You're not going to just design policy and say, hey, it's going to work. You need that constant feedback to iterate and develop something that's sustainable over time. So people are learning that, and it's something that you have to also educate as well as show them the use, as far as how the data can be useful and how it can give them a competitive advantage. And I think that's the type of language we've actually started using to show the value.
Okay. So, Stephen, you were mentioning the importance of system integration, and we know there's a lot of cool stuff, cool technology, cool applications, and so on, but you are suggesting that integrating this is a challenge so that we can actually get the benefits. So I'm curious what you have seen as you've traveled around to these 40 different countries, and what lessons can be learned on the best way to do this.
Yeah, I wouldn't really call it a challenge as much as a tremendous opportunity. So let me give you an example. Nigeria has had a history of challenging elections. There's a challenge. And the last presidential and gubernatorial election was monitored by several platforms that utilized the widespread availability of mobile telephony and mobile phones. It's something called, one of them is called Reclaim Niger. And what Reclaim Niger did was a lot of it has to do with mobilizing communities. Various civil society organizations mobilized Nigerians through stickers, through wristbands, to give them a short number. That during the election process, if they saw something that they thought wasn't kosher, if you will, they could text that information in. Some 26,000 times that occurred during this election cycle. And what we've been able to, a colleague of mine and I were able to look at this process of mobile phones being used to geolocate, put these incidents on a map, to verify them in the process. They knew where they were. They had a good story in terms of what the nature of the problem was. All of these are various systems that come together to allow a level of transparency and accountability in an all-important elections process that helps give the government a degree of legitimacy that in the absence of this verification, good luck Jonathan may not have the position that he has for being understood as a president as a result of a fairly fair and free election. So this is how technology is being used by communities to empower not just for service provision, but for the provision of good governance. And you can find examples of that all over the world, and it's really quite inspiring.
So I'll throw out one last question for the whole panel, and any of you who want to jump in can do so, and then we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. And that concerns policy barriers. So each of you have worked in different places. You're working on different aspects of it. So Zia, you're kind of in the smart city area. Kenfield, you're working on feedback devices, and Stephen, you're looking at political and economic development. What are the biggest policy barriers to making progress in this area, and are there particular provisions that you think would make a difference in enabling additional progress? Any of you who want to jump in? Hey, I could have asked, what your favorite invention was for the year. But.
I mean, I think the biggest barriers, it's just understanding it. And I think it's more so a people thing. It's not a technology thing. Mm-hmm. I think the technology is there. I think the intellect is there behind the technology, but the absence of knowing and how to utilize the technology and to take advantage of that is a big hurdle. And it's just, aligning visions and aligning interest, I think, is a big issue. I mean, that's from my experience, and that's just very limited. So I would say that's my...
No, that's important to point out.
I can maybe take a page out of my kind of venture capital book, is allowing for, and maybe even celebrating, maybe that's a little too much, failure. At the ad as a public official, whether you're spending on a $10,000 project or a $10 billion project, 10 billion is clearly an issue, but there's this kind of fear that, oh my God, I can't get this wrong, which then leads to, in many cases, not all, obviously a very conservative outlook on what should be done. I think if you allow for more rapid experimentation with smaller amounts of money, so it's not a money thing, I think, and if you say, okay, I'm going to try 5 different things, I'm going to spend $20,000 on these 5, and there's a potential that 3 of them don't work, but 1 or 2 of them could, I think that would make a big change.
Stephen?
Yeah, in my case, mostly I'm looking at the role of technology in my profession. I called it an area of limited statehood, a place where the state isn't found, slums, very rural communities. There is no state service provision. So in terms of policy impediments, it's the absence of policy, it's the absence of the state. But that leads to another problem. It's most often the case you've got more than one NGO trying to fill that governance vacuum, and there's a lack of coordination amongst the NGOs, so you end up having a lot of replication of effort. I'm sure that M-Survey is terrific with its work with farmers, and I applaud that. I think the innovation is going to be great, but there's something else in Nairobi called M-Farm that does the same thing. So I would love to see a day when M-Survey and M-Farm compared platforms, came up with a common design, and worked together to enlist even more farmers, to facilitate even more strength within that sector. So Here, the policy has to do with coordination amongst non-state actors.
Okay, let's open the floor to questions from the audience. We have somebody with a microphone back there. So just give us your name and your organization.
We've overwhelmed them.
And don't everyone speak at once. Here's a question. So we have a microphone coming up to you.
Hi, Fred Altman again. A couple of days ago, there was a session here, it was actually across the street as a Brookings session, on smart cities. And the one thing I heard is in terms of the people responsible for setting them up is not to have an isolated, well, we'll do this project and over there we'll do another project, but sort of put all the money in a pot and approach the problem universally, like instead of parking, the overall transportation problem. And I just wonder, as you sell your product, do you put it in the context of an overall transportation or some other overall scheme?
So can I ask you a question? Were these predominantly large companies that were saying this? Were they large companies or big institutions that made this comment?
This were mainly government officials.
Okay.
Well, it's the metropolitan studies, so cities.
So I unfortunately patently disagree with that. I think it's ridiculous. If you look at the history of these smart city projects, they generally have not resulted in smart cities. They've resulted in a lot of diagnoses, a lot of reports, a lot of conferences that this is what a grand smart city should look like. And then there'll be these big projects of 500, 600 million, 10 years, and so on. It's too much. It's just way too much. I think the opportunity is to actually take smaller slices of the pie, smaller verticals. So now we're trying to solve the problem of parking, and we will. Yeah, now, while all these other people are talking about changing the world and having kind of nice discussions on it, we're going and doing it. And we chose parking to go do it. In the same way, there are other technology companies, other small startups that are taking a piece of the puzzle and saying, I can solve this today. I'm not going to wait for what policy will change 10 years from now, 15. For me, long term is 3 months. I mean, I'm on a budget, I'm running out of money, I can't think that far. So I have to produce something that people will use, that I can sell, that solves a problem today and next year. Now, having said that, at a certain point in time, those pieces need to come together. But yes, parking should be with a policy around transportation and freedom of people moving around. So there are these bigger issues. But if we just focus on these bigger issues, we'll never bloody get anything done. So I chose to, and other entrepreneurs that are attacking the smart city problem will say that the efforts in the last 20 years to create these kind of big plans have led to nothing. But now, also primarily due to mobile technology, due to the democratization of information, due to the sensor stuff, there are companies out there building smart garbage cans, smart trucks, water pipes, and all of those things. And yes, there's some disconnected aspects to it, but it will come together.
Yeah, I was going to follow up on that.
I hope that was not unambiguous in my.
Well, I don't know if it was unambiguous for him, but I have a follow-up for you.
Yeah, sure.
In terms of the smart cities area, I mean, the applications that I've heard that seem to be most promising and a number of cities around the world have adopted have been one in the parking area, and then I think someone on an earlier panel mentioned the bus line situation where through a mobile device you can stand on a particular street corner and find when your bus is going to arrive there. I'm curious from your standpoint, what are the other promising areas?
Sure.
There's been a lot of hype. Some have worked out, some haven't worked out. What do you think, other than parking and buses?
Absolutely. So again, in my view, is that you take a look at specific, what I call vertical use cases, right? So bus information, real-time bus information is one. Smart parking is one. The smart grid area and electricity management has been another one, which is a broader issue. Where now people starting to put things on sensors on garbage cans. Okay, so now if you kind of think about the microeconomics of this stuff, a garbage truck going around the city, going to garbage cans that are not full or quarter full, and making that whole, that stuff adds up. Okay? You put a sensor in a garbage can that tells you, oh, I'm only half full, don't pick me up today, move on. Those are the kind of those micro level topics that are important. Pollution sensors at a block level that starts to give you a sense of the microclimate at a block level. People can do that today. Sensors in fire hydrants. I don't know if you know, but a lot of time is spent by fire departments actually checking the water pressure in a fire hydrant. There's no reason to do that. A water pressure sensor is not rocket science. Getting that data out is a little bit tricky, but once you lay out a network, and Qualcomm and Cisco and other people are kind of looking at doing that, you can get that information out. So transportation is becoming a very, very interesting area, broadly speaking. Then you have things like Uber, which to me also is a very much a smart city type of service. And Uber, for those you don't know, you can use your smartphone and you can find a car or taxi. I mean, I took an Uber car from the airport this morning. That's completely reinventing how taxi services and transportation happens, where you're not waiting for something to go by, but that data and information, that thing in this case is a car. And the car is telling you, I'm here, I'm available, and you can avail yourself of it. So I think it's going, and you can look at healthcare, you can look at all these other things. There's a range of those that, delivery of social services. I mean, the ability to, renew your damn license online instead of going in and standing in line for 4 hours, right? I mean, technology could have done that 15 years ago. So that's.
Yeah, and in this city, I would add bike sharing has been
Bike
very
sharing
popular
has
as well.
been huge. I mean, you've got City Bike in New York. The head of transportation, Gabe Klein, who started the bike share here, he did the same thing in Chicago 6 months ago. That is a phenomenal innovation. And now with apps, you can find where the bike is, so you don't have to walk there and see 10 bike stations that are empty. So you can see where it is. You can pay for it. I mean, that's where the smart city will come from the ground up.
Okay, literally. Stephen, you were going to jump in?
Well, not to plug Uber, but if this explains, Uber explains if you don't know what
You can
the
plug
cars,
them. I put some money in, so plug them in.
The cars with the mustaches in the front, if you've seen those and you've wondered what they are, those are the Uber taxis, but that's not what I want to talk about. I'm interested in trying to translate a conversation about smart cities into what I actually am involved in, a program called Smart Slums or Smart Informal Communities, where you're trying to leverage these mobile distributed technologies for purposes appropriate to people who aren't worrying about a parking place, but they're worried about where to find a bathroom or where to get clean water. There are many examples of this, but one that comes to mind is actually something that came to mind when John was speaking in the first panel. There is in India, in some of the informal communities or slums in India, a project being pursued by an NGO where the residents have a simple little like ATM card with not a lot of money on it, but they are able to use this card to get water out of a system that has sensors built into it in many different ways, in terms of whether it's operating, in terms of the water pressure, in terms of how often it's being used, et cetera. So building in these kinds of technologies into the global south is what I think is really quite fascinating. Why? Because in the global south you don't have an alternative service provider. The state isn't often there to provide that service. It's not understood to be a viable market for corporations, so it's outside of the market solution set. So you're looking at ways of leveraging technology, taking the efficiencies that you find, and providing services that are otherwise not there. One other fascinating example I just want to leave with, Google Earth Engine has a project it's based on Android phones where communities in the Amazon, Indian communities in the Amazon, are doing carbon monitoring and tracking illegal logging in the Amazon. And this, again, it's very localized carbon monitoring being done by indigenous communities in the Amazon. So the reach of these technologies is terrific with finding parking places, but it goes so much further than that in the global south.
And some places in Africa, I know they're using this technology to help endangered animals as well.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
Other questions? There's a gentleman right there on the aisle.
Good morning. I'm Emerson Brooking, intern here at Brookings. And I was curious, I read very recently that in early 2014, Twitter will be unveiling a skeleton version of their platform that operates entirely via SMS. And I was curious from your perspective whether companies like Twitter that are announcing functionalities like this, are they meeting a demand that exists now or anticipating a demand?
And this is addressed to me,
To you and to anyone else who'd like to answer.
gentlemen?
So you're asking if they're meeting demand or anticipating a demand for SMS? Is that what you're asking?
No, for Twitter.
For Twitter? I mean, yeah, I mean.
Do you think SMS would be a viable
Well, I
niche
mean, that's how
for them?
Twitter started. Twitter started by SMS. I mean, that was,
But
that's how it,
Right, just
Yeah.
to clarify, I'm curious whether, there's an increasing use of mobile technologies in the developing world. Is the demand really for very local functionality, or is there an increasing push to be part of the global dialogue?
So I think for me, the difference is between a smartphone and a feature phone, right? Facebook is having the same challenge in India and other parts of Africa. They cannot push out this fancy Facebook homepage onto a Nokia, if Nokia still exists as a company, the Nokia feature phone, which is one of the most popular phones in the emerging markets. So what Twitter and Facebook and others are doing, they're kind of coming down the technology stack, if you will, and they have to do it for a certain period of time because the US and Europe is saturated, right? And there's just so much you can, and it's a tiny piece of the population. So the billions of people are not in Europe and the US. And over the next 4, 5, 10 years, in order to get to those people, you can't sit there hoping that every one of them is going to have an iPhone and an Android phone. So you have to figure out how to deliver that type of capability through a feature phone. And the primary way to do that is through an SMS-type messaging system and not an application-based system. So that's why they're doing it. I mean, it's straightforward math.
I mean, for me, I mean, for M-Survey, that's how we deliver our surveys,
Right.
through SMS. I
Do you use
mean,
Frontline or?
No, this is
Just
our
your own proprietary?
native.
Yeah.
We connect directly to the telcos, and we have agreements with the telcos. We're scalable across any region.
And same thing
Right.
with M-Pesa. I mean, M-Pesa would not have gone, anywhere if they waited for kind of a nice little user interface and buttons and so on. It works.
I think it's platform agnostic in a sense. I mean, SMS is across any platform that you can use. And I mean, specifically for us, we know we're looking to get, no one's going to download a survey app. I mean, that's just,
Right.
that's never going to happen, right? So I mean, you have to meet them you have to meet someone where they are. And SMS is WhatsApp. It's no different from SMS. I mean, WhatsApp has over 300 million users because it's an easy integrated system that you can use. Everyone is very familiar with SMS, so I think that's just meeting everyone how they use their mobile phones.
All of that's correct, except for I would say that by 2018, it's expected that 50% of the phones in Africa are going to be internet enabled. And when you spend time, as I do in Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa, you find incredible growth in some of the social media that you'd be familiar with. So when we speak of what's going to happen there, we have to be very precise when we talk about where we're talking about, right? Rwanda is another place that may surprise some of you that is really quite remarkable in the growth of internet-enabled telephony. So you have to look very specifically. I know that Facebook, one of the recent times I was in Nairobi, Facebook put on a big festival in the middle of the big public park in the middle of Nairobi. Tens of thousands of people were there celebrating. They had their phones, they were dancing. It was a terrific example of the reach of some of the kinds of technologies that you'd be familiar with in places that you'd be surprised perhaps to find.
Other questions?
John has one.
Oh. Yeah, we have a microphone coming up to you.
Stephen, you talked about the importance of collaboration and that's trying to avoid duplication. I'm wondering, could you give some examples of where you've seen that actually happen?
Yeah.
In developing countries or even here in the United States, but I'm kind of more interested in developing countries.
Yeah, so the question has to do with, do you see examples of collaboration amongst people who have like-minded interest goals, objectives, maybe using different skill sets? Yeah, you see it in small ways. I mean, I could look at something called Spatial Collective, which works in Mathare, one of the slums in Nairobi, is working also with an NGO that has as its purpose abating some of the hate speech that one finds on text messaging platforms. Especially leading up to the recent election in Kenya. So you have these scrappy, smaller NGOs that are coming together and trying to carve out a niche where they're solving really pressing problems. In my own experience, and it may be that this is just simply unique to me, where I sometimes see less collaboration, more competition, is where you get into the bigger boys and girls, where you have the larger NGOs that are all going after the same Gates Foundation, Ford Foundation, other foundation grants. And so any sort of collaboration, it's like competition within a business community. It's like McDonald's and Burger King collaborating. Probably isn't going to happen anytime soon, or should it? You know, it's where you have that competition for funding that I see less collaboration.
And that was sort of my follow-up question was where, you know, is this an issue actually of the funders? Do they need to do something differently to actually spur this collaboration versus this competition?
Yeah.
I mean, not the. I mean, competition is not a. Not, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I actually think it's a very good thing. But
yeah.
I'm just saying, you know, is there who's going to fund these collective impact type of efforts? Because you see it starting to happen a little bit in domestically, but I haven't. It's been really hard to see it happen internationally. I think that's really the key of moving things forward and breaking down some of these cycles of failure, actually. So.
I don't have any direct response to that. You know, one of the things I guess indirectly I would say, however, is I'm really such a huge fan of innovation centers that are found all around the world. Some of them are sponsored by the Googles and the Microsofts of the world, right? But also there are the examples of iHub, again in Nairobi, where you have entrepreneurs, people who are interested in making money. They have an idea, but they also have a wonderfully collaborative spirit of working together often and solving common problems and coming together on particular projects, sitting in a sort of a communal space in an office building on the Yungong Road in Nairobi. Those are places where you see the kinds of collaboration that I like.
And I just wanted to comment also too. It's just these problems don't only just persist in emerging markets. I mean, like for instance, in 2011, in the UK, it cost the UK £400 million to do the census. I mean, they're trying to just get rid of it because they don't know what to do. I mean, you have mobile phones, you have technologies that can actually circumvent that. You know, so I mean, and that's why we focus on what we do, which is surveys. I mean, mobile surveys. I mean, there's nothing as far as, I mean, the technology in the back end is innovative because it does real-time analysis, but it's just surveys that have been around for, you know, since the 19th centuries, right? So, I mean, these are problems that persist in developed countries as well. You know, how do you can actually reduce costs, you know, of counting people? You know, and that comes back to the smart city problem, right? So.
Okay, there's a question on the aisle there.
Yes, hi, Judith Hellstein, Hellstein Associates. You talked about sensors being put into roads in developing countries, or buildings, or infrastructure, or water facilities. And I guess my question is that oftentimes you've seen these items put in and then they break and then there's no ability to fix them, or the government can't buy new ones, or there's some other issue, and then the whole technology is not being used. And what do you see? And that's why I was always leery about that type of going in that way. If we don't have an answer of how we're going to train people to get them fixed or to buy them or what or that.
Sure. So I mean that in a prior life, I actually was living in DC and worked at the World Bank for about 6 years, and that's one of the broader issues around programs of any kind, whether it's technology or education or anything else, is the difference between building something first time and having a nice ribbon cutting ceremony and everybody takes a picture, and then 6 months later you don't have the capacity and the money to continue it forward. So I think that is a program design issue. I think now, because of globalization and the transparency of information and transparency of data around pricing and contracts and so on and so forth, there are ways to deal with that. You certainly, if it's a project that's designed that doesn't allow for an ongoing capability to operate, then it's a badly designed project in the first place. But if you can, there's certainly ways to do that. But that's a fundamental, issue. That's a problem in a lot of, you'll know more about this on international development projects, where so many of these things are front-end loaded, and then, teachers get paid for a year, nice building, and then where do you get the money for the second year? And people are surprised, oh, where did the teachers go? Well, you didn't pay them.
Right here is a question.
I'm Donald Barnes, South China University of Technology. This all sounds very good, but what about the flip side of this? Is there any danger or possibility in the probability of governments or large corporations or something like this co-opting this whole field and taking advantage and control in such a way that we are being used rather than utilizing this technology?
Well, you just have to read the Washington Post today that I picked up from the airport, that talking about what the NSA was doing on cookies and browsers and so on and so forth. Look, anytime you have software in anything, whether it's a device, whether it's on the internet, it's a door, and it's a two-way door. There's no way to stop that. And you can have this continuous arms race of access and privacy and so on and so forth. Personally, I've given up on privacy. It's just, I'm concerned about financial privacy. So there's 2-3 bank accounts. Well, make sure my few $100s is okay. But other than that, you have no privacy. One concern I do have on the Internet of Things is that hackers getting into your Facebook password and so on is disturbing and socially challenging, but it's not going to necessarily kill anybody. A Google autonomous car that's chugging along down the street and somebody in some country decides to take it over and make a left turn and drive into a building, that if it's software, it can be done. And so I think there's an issue around the Internet of Things and hacking and access that people haven't talked about yet. And it's also, there's been some incidences of people trying to take over autopilots on planes. That's another example of that. So if something's wirelessly connected, it has software in it, there's a little bit of excitement to be had there. And we'll have to kind of figure that out.
Actually, at Brookings, I think it was last year, we had a drone contest, and it turns out a lot of the software is open source software. And so one of the strategies that was used in this contest was to basically take down all the other drones, and they did it successfully.
Yeah, you can, but if somebody's built it, if a human being's built it, another human being can figure out how to unbuild it. That's the premise, right? And you had last week on 60 Minutes, Amazon, Jeff Bezos talk about the Amazon Prime drones that are going to start delivering packages. Yeah, so if you have drones kind of flying around, first people are going to start, shooting at them just for the hell of it. So you have to solve that, or throwing rocks at them. But then, taking control of those drones. So as software gets into more physical stuff, I think that's going to be an issue that has to be tackled.
So maybe I'll close with a summary question for the panel, just to get your thoughts on innovation and what do you think the most important things we can do now, either in the United States or in the developing world?
I need more time to think.
Stephen?
Sure. I think that one of the things we need to start thinking about in terms of encouraging the use of technology wisely is to encourage actually the educational base, encourage the education of coders who have a good ethical base. They know what it is they're trying to do in terms of solving problems that are appropriate to their home country, to their region where they live. So encouraging coding for mobile platforms, for wherever the case may be. That's where I would want to turn.
I think specifically empathy. I mean, I think innovation is out of having empathy for others, and specifically in emerging markets, you know, expressing, you know, solving real like problems that are scalable. You know, I think that's the focus. You know, because there are a lot of problems in emerging markets that, you know, simple fix can actually change, and to focus on that with technology. And I agree with, you know, the intellect as far as coding and access. You know, access to, you know, technology, access to developing skill sets to solve these problems. And, you know, I'm going to plug M-Survey again, iterative process. I mean, design and allowing people to fail, you know, within the whole context of developing technologies is definitely important. Because even with your coding skills, you also have to accept that part of the developing technologies is failure. So I think that's a necessary step in emerging markets coming from the Caribbean myself, whereas you're looking just for A's, and instead of, okay, failure is good, what did you learn from the failure to move on? So,
Okay, Zia?
So I'd say kind of radical public-private collaboration. There is so much opportunity. I mean, so much of our economy here and elsewhere is embedded in the public sector from a GDP perspective and healthcare and so on and so forth. I mean, I'm partially an Obamacare supporter. We won't get into that discussion, but I think it just blew me away that $600 million was spent on a website, even with the back-end stuff, right? I mean, I don't get it. And so I think bringing the public and private sector together, not in the traditional way that it's been done, but to look at different frameworks where that collaboration can happen in a much less risky way, would have pretty dramatic impact.
Well, I have learned several things on this panel. I've learned about liberation technology, smart slums, and my favorite, smart garbage cans. So I guess that is in our future. But I want to thank Stephen, Zia, and Kenfield for sharing your expertise with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.